Welcome back. You're still watching Network Africa right here on Channels Television. Now we're looking at security matters. 3 Kenyan soldiers were wounded on Sunday when their truck hit a makeshift bomb that police said had been planted by insurgents from the Somali Islamist group Al-Shabaab. The blast took place in the same region, that's Lamu County, on Kenya's northern coast, where last Sunday Al-Shabaab fighters killed 2 soldiers during an attack on a Kenya military base. Kenyan troops repelled the attack, killing 11 militants in the process. Al-Shabaab fighters have staged several cross-border raids in Lamu County since last June, including 2 attacks in the town of Mpeketoni, in which militants killed at least 60 people a year ago. Al-Shabaab, which seeks to overthrow the Western-backed Somali government and impose its strict interpretation of Islamic law, has frequently targeted neighboring Kenya in recent years, saying it's retaliating for Kenya's participation in an African Union peacekeeping force in Somalia. Now, as the war on terror continues in various parts of the world, the Internal Security for Somalia has confirmed that 4 Islamist gunmen have been killed after detonating a car bomb and shooting their way into a National Intelligence Agency training site. Thankfully, the government says it did not suffer any casualties on its side. The Interior Ministry displayed the insurgents' bullet-ridden bodies to the media following the assault, which started just after dawn and lasted for about 1 hour. The Al-Qaeda-aligned group has in the past stepped up attacks during the Muslim fasting month of Ramadan, which began on Wednesday. Al-Shabaab fighters on Saturday attacked a police post near the capital, killing 8 officers in the process. Well, 1 week after the president of Sudan returned to his home country after making an appearance at the AU summit, which concluded on the same day, South Africa is denying reports that ministers secretly plotted the departure of President Bashir. The Sudanese president faced the possibility of arrest because of an international criminal court warrant on charges of genocide. A South African court ordered Mr. Bashir to stay in the country while it decided if the warrant should be carried out. But before the court ruled on that matter, Mr. Bashir ended up flying out of South Africa and he's back home in Sudan. Also back home is our foreign affairs correspondent, Amarach Ubani, who was in South Africa this time last week. She joins us in studio. Amarach, thank you very much for joining us on the program.
You're welcome, Cynthia.
Now, since you were our eyes on ground, South Africa is denying the allegations here, but was there anything you saw to support this?
Well, what I heard while I was on the ground there was that, the courts, as you mentioned, the courts in Pretoria had already sought that the government arrest Omar al-Bashir, which the government totally ignored and did not make mention of it. In fact, in one of my reports that I sent back home, we did see and hear the AU chairperson, Dlamini Zuma, welcoming Omar al-Bashir to the AU summit. Now, much later at the closing ceremony of the AU summit, she did address the same issue, saying that the AU was not a bilateral meeting, it was a multilateral meeting, and then when leaders are invited for summits like these, they are given a set of agreements. They're given a set of rules to abide by. If they agree to abide by those rules, then they can attend the summit. And in this case, she said Omar al-Bashir had no reason not to be at the AU summit. And had no reason not to be in South Africa.
Yeah, I guess you're on the fence to some extent.
No, I'm not on the fence here because I'm not the one who's keeping.
I just had to try to
keeping Omar al-Bashir. This was actually the South African government. We totally ignored it, and the government said that they would investigate how Omar al-Bashir eventually left the country because the court had said, okay, now that he's here, then you must arrest him. But they said, okay, fine, we don't know how he left. That's what they said. When I spoke to the Sudanese Foreign Minister, Ibrahim Gando, he said that the president will leave as scheduled. We said, when exactly? He said, oh, as scheduled. That's all he said.
Okay, so we'll just stick with, at this point, I also have to ask you, it looks as though this event somewhat overshadowed the essence of the summit, Was that the case?
Just a little bit, because trustless journalists were asking all sorts of questions. Is Omar al-Bashir here? I mean, it had been speculated whether he was going to be there or not. Eventually, someone did say that they sighted his aircraft, his plane, on the ground in the war base in Pretoria, and so it meant that he was around. And then at the summit, when Lamini Zuma came up and said, we're welcoming Omar al-Bashir on his re-election and so on, it became very obvious that the president was around. But, you know, the AU summit itself moved away from these issues and decided to talk on the focus of the summit, which is women empowerment and Agenda 2063, which took up most of the discussions. And then there are other issues that they talked about, security on the continent, which would be the situation in South Sudan, where they said we're going to call, you know, the two parties. They set up an intergovernmental ad hoc committee with a new AU envoy, which would be the former Malian President Omar Konaré, who would be working immediately with the parties involved in the crisis in Sudan to discuss ways to resolve this as soon as possible. And then, of course, Burundi also took up, you know, some of the discussions at the AU summit. I remember Lamini Zuma saying at one of the peace and security meetings, I think she was talking about South Sudan, where she said, for what? Why are people dying? I mean, that was the first time I had heard her talk candidly about an issue on the continent. She seemed so passionate about it. She was like, at the end, she had to apologize, you know, for, you know, blurting out her real thoughts on the matter, and she had to rein in her thoughts and, you know, comply with what the leaders eventually had agreed.
Now, just before I let you go, Amarachi, what is the plan? What are the strategies that, you know, that are supposed to be put in place, considering that the summit is over, before we start to see results? Because this is 1 week later.
Yes, that is a very important question, because African leaders are very good at making plans. They're very good at, you know, planning strategies. They're very good at making, you know, plans for the future. First there was 2020, and then you move on to 2016, and don't forget the Millennium Goals of 2015, which we have, you know, obviously we're still working on. But 2063, leaders hope that eventually they will be able to say that Africa is a fully developed country. Now, the AU has decided on a 10-year plan. You know, every 10 years they come together to check the progress that has been made, and they say that is what they will follow. So there are already plans on the ground to make sure that, you know, certain indices are, you know, being checked to be sure that, you know, that we're well on the way to progress. So by the end of 10 years, they'll come and review, you know, what they have done, and then plan for the next 10 years until we get to the year 2026.
Well, see you in 10 years. Hopefully we would have made progress then.
Hopefully.
Our foreign affairs correspondent, Amarach Ubani, live here in studio. Thank you very much. Now we're going to look at another story, finally on the program, and on an inspiring note. We take a look at how people who've been displaced by conflict in various countries are now refugees in Kenya and Kakuma. We look at how they've managed to preserve their love and passion for art.
This is one of the prices which people from war-torn countries have to pay. They've been displaced. Despite the fact that they've lost their homes, their passion remains alive. They continue to pursue their dreams of being artists, which they hope will put their daily struggle in a refugee camp to an end. While visiting the refugees over the weekend, the Kenyan representative for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, Raouf Mazou, called for greater efforts to help the refugees achieve their dreams.
Refugees who are here in Kenya, and some of whom have been in Kenya for a long period of time, we are about durable solution. We are about trying to make sure that refugees can live normally.
James Okito, 19 years of age, was forcibly displaced from his homeland in South Sudan with his family when he was 2 years old. Being raised at the Kakuma camp, Okito said graphic art inspires him to strive for a better future.
Art and craft is something I've been inspired to do. You know, find guys drawing things, you even try to imagine something, you try to make it in a paper, try to come it in a way such that I have seen that it's most interesting and even pleasuring. So you enjoy it. It's something that comes from your heart.
Okito said he hopes his talent in graphic arts can be fully developed and bring him a job in the future.
Like photoshopping is something very interesting, and it's something very professional. Like I've learned from our teachers. They have been doing them in Nairobi there, so they do for maybe advertisements. So they print for presidents. So something very they get salary. So they earn from it. They make a living. So that's what I'm hoping.
Activists from all over the world are also trying to help the refugees, especially those who decide to stay in Kenya, to turn their talent into a sustainable livelihood.
I want to grow a very strong art community that is able to sustain itself, give these guys a sustainable way of earning a living, and in the same way offer them hope that even though they're in the camps, they're able to do something meaningful with their talent.
Hopefully, things will get better for people like Okito, and their passion will lead to some form of restoration for all that was lost.
Indeed, every cloud has a silver lining. Well, just a reminder of one of the stories we looked at earlier on in the program, the Ghanaian government has destroyed homes in the capital, Accra, in order to prevent floods. And people have ended up being homeless and are now protesting on the streets. That's the basis for our question of the day. We'd simply like to know, what are your thoughts on the Ghanaian government's decision to destroy homes in order to prevent floods? You can reach out to us either via email or Twitter. The address and handle are right there on your screen. As always, it's been a pleasure having you join us on Network Africa. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Cynthia Are.